For a child-friendly and responsive justice system, it is imperative to promote strategies that provide an alternative to detention and custodial sentences for children. It is recommended that states ensure that all structures, procedures as well as programs in the administration of child justice and well-being should allow children to take responsibility for their actions and to encourage reparation, mediation and restitution, especially for the direct victims of the crime. This morning we focus on the Child Justice Program under the auspices of the Ministry of Gender Equality and Child Welfare to discuss how the program creates an enabling judicial and social welfare environment. Elizabeth Weil, a social worker at the Ministry, now joins us with more. Good morning, ma'am, and welcome to Good Morning Namibia.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Please help us understand this development and implementation process of the Child Justice Program.
Children have been treated, unfortunately, in our justice system as little adults. And for this reason, as we know, the criminal justice system is a very punitive system. It's saying society is displeased with the individual law breaker that should take responsibility and has intended to break the law. So for that reason, we punish you because we are not happy with you. Now, in the case of a child, if we treat a child as a little adult, and he goes through that system, and we punish him upon punishment, but there is nowhere where we can say, stop. Is it fair towards a child and the development of a child to take the presumption that children intentionally broke the law, or even to that extent understood the consequence of what they did? So for this reason, the ministry is of the opinion that there should be more a restorative approach to children, taking into consideration their developmental stage, their social environment, and deal with the child in a holistic manner. Not just the crime that has been committed, but how, where, who, what, who is this child? So we deal from an ecological systems approach with the child, that the child is not an island on itself, that the crime did not just happen out of thin air. So for this reason, the ministry has placed social workers who are now designated probation officers at the magistrates' courts, and we assess all children who have been charged with an alleged crime. It doesn't mean now the child has committed the crime, you see the social worker, so the child is out of trouble, which all people think. The law has still been broken, so we still have to rectify, we have to justify the scales.
That preempts the next question, ma'am. Does it depend on the nature of the alleged crime, and does the age of the alleged offender, being this minor child, also play a role?
All of them. Depending on the crime, even if it's a Schedule 1 offense, the child still has to be seen by a social worker. An assessment still has to be done. The who, the what, the why still has to be answered. And once again, like I said, the child doesn't come from thin air. Where does this child come from? What happened? And how best can we address the law that has been broken and to help the child at the same time? The Child Justice Program made provision for diversion for lesser offences, Schedule 2, even Schedule 3 offences. How, in cases of Schedule 1 offences, now we're talking big offences, murder, rape. Those are that have to be dealt with in the criminal justice system. And unfortunately, it has to be done that way, so that children do not get away and say that they can do whatever they want. And like I say, we are still answerable to a society as a whole.
Just very briefly, if we're talking about Schedule 2 and Schedule 3 offences, which are those typically?
Schedule 3 offences are your petty crimes. Stealing cell phones. Schedule two offences are more your house break-ins with a higher value. So now we're talking about $6,000 of TV stolen or radio stolen. Schedule 1 offences, yeah, is your more serious crimes, rape, murder.
And a child is anyone 17 years and younger?
Yes.
Very well. To what extent or not are parents and guardians involved in the rehabilitation of child offenders?
At the moment, our diversion program is dealt with by the Ministry of Youth, Sport, Youth and National Services. And they have a holistic program that include the parents as a stakeholder. My mother used to say, charity starts at home. So does the child and who the child is.
But what if the child doesn't have access to a safe home?
Good question. And that's why we do the assessment, to see who is this child, who is the guardian, who is the parent, what is their involvement with the child. Because some parents, unfortunately, have to work all the time. They don't know who their child is. And the child ends up with wrong friends or in the street. Or, more seriously, being harmed in their own home. And
thanks. We can only gauge the success or otherwise of these programs if there are monitoring and evaluation systems in place. So which are the systems that are indeed in place to track these children, but also to gauge whether there is progress?
And the sad part is that we are not enough social workers to have that tracking system in place and monitoring system in place. So currently, if a child has gone through the system and has finished his or her diversion, then a criminal case will be withdrawn and the child will have no criminal record against his or her name. The idea being that the child then starts with a clean slate and hopefully that the program, counseling, the rehabilitation program has indeed worked. And the child has now been educated enough and created more awareness as to the services out there for the child. We have very few repeat offenders. We do have them, but we have very few repeat offenders in the Commerce region at least. That has numerous cases against them where the system, obviously, we have not done enough in that particular child's case. But in terms of our monitoring and evaluation, at the moment we don't have the resources and more especially social workers that can go out into communities and involve all of these stakeholders to keep the child on the straight and narrow.
You referred to some repeat minor offenders, and according to your own concession, that could mean that you as social workers didn't do enough. But how much is enough? What constitutes enough for a child to make sure that the child does not reoffend?
That is a brilliant question, because we can only do so much before you can lead the horse to the water, but you can't make that horse drink. And the same is with children. And if I've always said the premises must be that there are good in all of us. And it's only when we come to a crossroad and when we have to make decisions that we seem to choose the easiest path, which most definitely normally means the wrong path. Yeah. I'm hungry, but instead of going to the social worker or even to the school to report it, the child would rather go into the shop and steal. So in saying that, it just means that we would never know how much is enough until we come to that crossroad to say, oh, Neeman, you again. And
one of the statutory tools that is in place to help guide and guard the well-being of children is, of course, the Child Care and Protection Act. Which other statutes, which other mechanisms, which other regulatory frameworks are in place?
Well, there's one of the challenges that we have no legislation specifically for child justice. Our ministry is tirelessly working now in terms of the obligation to the CRC, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, to bring about the Child Justice Act. They have so far managed the Child Justice Bill, which is still in progress. And that legislation will specifically speak towards children that is in conflict with the law and how we deal with them.
We've unfortunately run out of time. Your very brief concluding remarks, please, ma'am.
Very brief conclusion marks. Like they said, no child, it takes a village to raise a child, and it's the same with child justice. Unfortunately, we don't have enough programs, enough resources, enough to really tackle the program hands-on. But we are working on it, and we're doing our very level best to try and get children out of the criminal justice system, but to also make them responsible adults.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and continue the good fight.
Thank you.
Yeah. There you have it, Ms. Elizabeth Weil from the Ministry of Gender Equality and Child Welfare, talking to us about the Child Justice Program. We're back with